All right, shall we get started?
Yes, I think we can.
Perfect. So, Jaco, I'll let you do the intro.
Thanks, Jerome. Good morning, everybody, especially the clients from Marsh. We're happy that you join us this morning. Of course, we are going to talk about operational technology. But before we get there, I would just like to introduce Jerome from Silverfort, as well as John. John might be joining us remotely on his telephone. He's traveling at the moment, so John is the boots on the ground here in South Africa, while Jerome looks after insurance partners globally. So yes, I think with that said, we will share the slide and recordings with anybody who are interested in it. And then you can take it from there, Jerome.
Thank you very much, Jaco. Highly appreciate it. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Before I start, just one housekeeping item. You will find a Q&A button on your panel. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use that. Type your question in the chat, and we will address those at the end of the webinar. So with that, let's just jump right into it. Securing OT, enhancing your cyber defenses with Silverfort. So the first thing that I'd like to address is really to look at the common attack vectors that we've seen specifically for OT environments over the last couple of years. And it really starts with credential theft. I'm thinking that all of you have heard of that. And there's different ways of using of getting these credentials, I should say. You can actually buy credentials on the dark web. You can social engineer your way into getting credentials. We've all heard those famous attacks where the attacker starts by calling a help desk, pretending to be an external vendor that has lost their credentials, and then getting a new account. So credential theft also very often sits at the source of common OT attacks. And then once inside the environment, obviously the attacker starts to move laterally and tries to deploy their malware or do whatever they need to do. We'll get to that a little bit later in the webinar. The second one is actually vulnerability exploitation. OT equipment, specifically IoT equipment that's exposed to the internet, isn't always up to date and doesn't always have the latest security patches deployed. So what attackers very often do, they just scan the web, and there's tools that let them do that in a very simple way. Looking for devices that have active access to the internet, having known vulnerabilities, and then they obviously use those to get into those environments. And then once within those environments, they start doing privilege escalation, trying to find hashes that lie around in places where they don't belong. And from there, deploying then their ransomware and shutting down critical systems and doing whatever they do once in the environment. The third one that has become very popular in several sectors over the last couple of years, retail is one of them, and then I'm sure everybody heard of that, is supply chain compromise. Now, there's two ways, or two major ways you can do that. You can actually do a less sophisticated supply chain compromise where you actually use the supply chain vendor to do a social engineering, to pretend, again, that you're a worker of that vendor, getting credentials from that vendor to the victim system, and then using that to deploy malware or whatever you need to do. The second one being a little more sophisticated, where you actually attack the supply chain vendor, compromise their systems, and get your malware code or your code that has a backdoor into a firmware of a supply chain vendor that then gets deployed to all that vendor's clients making a backdoor available to the attacker to all of the clients of that vendor. And that way, very often, an attacker can sit in an environment for a very long time without being seen. What I'd like to look at now is really, what do all of those vectors have in common? What is the thing that we see repeatedly in those attacks? Well, they're all based on identities in some way, shape, or form. They use stolen passwords or identities bought on the dark web or accounts bought on the dark web. They use phishing techniques to get to credentials. They use third-party access, which again is based on accounts and identities. In some way, they all have an element of privilege escalation because very often the identities or the accounts that are being used as an entry point are not enough to get to the critical systems. So attackers apply techniques to do privilege escalation and get to other accounts that then gives them access to more critical system that they actually want to attack in that whole attack chain. And to do that, they need to do lateral movement, which is very common, obviously. They need to do recon of the environment that they're actually in. They need to understand all the systems in that environment that they have access to, and then the systems that they don't have access to that they need to do privilege escalation for. So everything is based on accounts and identities at some point in the attack chains. So from here, let's just have a look at some of the attacks that have been made public specifically for OT equipment and what the impact was and how the victims have recovered and what their losses were, actually. So in 2021, the DarkSide ransomware group attacked the Colonial Pipeline. And what was easy about that attack is that the time to recovery for the victim was really, really quick. However, they did have to pay 75 Bitcoin, which at the time was worth $4.4 million in order to get rid of the malware that the attacker had deployed in the environment. And the way they got in was very simple. The victim, Colonial Pipeline, had VPN access to the environment, and they didn't really maintain that. So there was an inactive VPN that was just being misused. There was no multi-factor authentication on that VPN, so it was very easy for the attacker to get in. The next one is Health Services, HSE, which also was attacked in 2021 by Conti Group, a very famous ransomware group that deployed their ransomware based on a vulnerability that they exploited. Now here, the loss was very significant because recovery took a fair amount of time. The victim had systems going down. The appointment systems, as you can see here, were all compromised and had to be completely restored, which meant that all of the appointments had to be canceled for a while. So that was a significant loss to the victim. What was really interesting here about that attack is that the Conti Group have been in that environment for 2 months before they were detected. And that's really, they could move laterally, they could do whatever they wanted, and they were completely under the radar. And I think one of the reasons was because there was no real radar. There was no detection capability. There was no monitoring for identity security. Nothing in that, no technology was in place to be able to monitor this. So the attacker could basically stay in that environment for a long time before pulling the trigger and deploying the ransomware. And the last one that I wanted to go through was an attack from the Hive in 2022 to the Costa Rica Social Security Fund. Now, this attack also had some of the systems being disrupted for a number of weeks. And what the attacker was, they infiltrated the system in a very simple way, shut down critical healthcare systems, including one that's called the single digital health file, which was responsible then for all the disrupted nationwide medical services and thousands of appointments having to be cancelled. And the reason for that attack, why it was successful, was exactly the same. Really the lack of identity security controls, allowing that ransomware to spread and allowing the attacker to do lateral movement in a very, very simple way. Now, John, good morning. Nice to have you on.
Apologies for being a couple of minutes late. You know how it goes.
No worries.
I just wanted to chat quickly to the audience. South Africa, we have unique challenges, as most of you know. And strangely enough, we actually have quite a few mining companies that are now actively using Silverfort to protect their identities within their environment across both their corporate networks and their OT environments currently. And I can't obviously divulge names, but it's a very large gold mine. There is another mineral supplier of cobalt. And, the guys have been having challenges in the last sort of 6 months, most probably. We've helped to eradicate some of their challenges and make sure that their identities are locked down across the board. And this is where the difference comes in. So, if you are looking at protecting identity in South Africa, don't feel lonely. We have lots of customers, but we also have lots of mining customers, because I did see quite a few mining companies joining us this morning. Anyway, sorry, Jerome, I just wanted to
that's
just
very, very helpful.
that little piece.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that's very helpful for the people on the call to actually see that we are in that space, not just the territory, but also in that same space where we actively protect environments. So thank you for that. But getting back to where we left off, what are actually the challenges? Why are these attacks successful, or why did they go unnoticed for such a long period of time? So, there we go. One of the things that's actually very painful for organizations operating OT environments is to implement separation in those environments, to implement tiering for these environments. You don't want to mix those environments. And there is a model called the Purdue model that has been around since the 1990s, specifying how these environments should be separated. And hopefully you've implemented some of that already. But the challenge here really is that it is very complex. There's different ways of doing that. You can try and separate environments with GPOs, which can become very complex because you have all those permutations of, on the one side, the roles that you need, and on the other hand, the resources. And enforcing the separation of identities per tier is something that is not built into those environments. It is very challenging to maintain that manually and to do that at scale. Then the other thing that's really challenging with implementing this tiering is that you don't have the same security controls for all of those assets, for all of those resources. You have different operating systems that require different management interfaces for access controls. So you're looking at all of those consoles and try to figure out how to implement tiering within different types of resources with different operating systems. So that can be a significant challenge. And the other thing that we all know, OT equipment runs for a very long time. That's the environments where you see very old operating systems having run or doing production services for a very, very long time. And so there's a number of challenges with that. Old systems don't accept modern security controls. The protocols that modern security elements use didn't exist at the time the operating system was created for old OT equipment. So that can be quite a challenge. And then on the other hand, So that's the protection side, and then the visibility side is the same thing. You don't have all those integration capabilities with old equipment. You can't do the entire monitoring you can do on modern equipment that you on that old equipment. So that's becoming quite a challenge. It leaves blind spots in the environment, specifically in the OT environment, where you don't really know who's actually on the system, what that person's doing, or that identity, that account is doing, and for how long it's been there. The other thing is agents, right? Production systems, nobody wants to install new agents on those systems because it can disrupt production. It is very tricky to, specifically for security agents, to have them tested on production systems. So you really need to go looking for agentless security elements that help with all of the challenges that we saw previously, which is difficult because most of the security technology out there today requires something to be deployed on endpoints. And if it's a very old system, it's probably not compatible anymore. You can't install that new agent on the Windows 98, for example. And then the last bit is, sometimes this equipment has to be isolated. You don't want to expose it to the internet. So you actually need a solution that allows to work in an air-gapped environment. You need a security solution that doesn't require access to a public network, which also limits the amount of security solutions you can put in place. So how does Silverfort help with OT equipment and specifically security, securing identities for OT equipment? Before we go into the specifics of OT, let me just give you a quick overview how Silverfort actually works, what the solution actually does. So Silverfort has a simple component that sits in the identity infrastructure. And that component will actually pause every single authentication that is happening. It doesn't matter whether that authentication comes from a normal user, an admin, or a service account, a non-human identity, which obviously there's a lot of in OT environments. It will see that authentication and it has the ability to pause that authentication, or that authentication request, I should say, before that goes onto the actual resource. So our runtime access protection component kicks in for every single authentication, OT, cloud, on-premise environments, doesn't matter, and applies a policy. Now that policy can give you visibility over your identity security posture management, over active threats, but it can also enforce in real time. It could put multi-factor authentication on that authentication. It can deny access by default to certain elements, for example. It can allow the tiering or privileged access security, and it also protects non-human identities. So all of this we can do in real time before that authentication is actually given to the resource where the user has demanded access to, or the non-human identity the service account has demanded access to. So the nice thing about this technology is, as you can see, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, there is no agent required here. It is completely agentless. There is no proxy in between the authentication and the user. So it doesn't require a single change in the environment. Our platform sits behind the identity infrastructure, capturing every authentication, and then applying the policy, sending an MFA if required to the user trying to access with any MFA provider here, or protecting a service account by doing something we call ring fencing. I don't want to go too much into detail, but all of that without requiring any change in the environment. So bottom line, how Silverfort operates is that for every single identity that tries to access any resource, we can implement identity security posture management, identity threat detection and response for visibility, but we can also, in real time, implement protection. Universal MFA, and imagine for those old platforms where your third-party vendor needs to do a PowerShell to an OT system, how do you implement multi-factor authentication for that access? All you can do today is maybe when he connects through VPN, have that MFA kick in. But when he gets from his jump host to the OT system, it's very difficult to implement another security element here. That's where we come in. We can put MFA even on a PowerShell without having to deploy an agent. And the same goes for unauthorized access, stopping with our authentication firewall, securing non-human identity service accounts, or even do privileged access security and allowing to do tiering. So what does that mean in the context of OT? Now, the first thing, which I already said, is agentless MFA. Because we don't require anything to be deployed on the endpoint, we don't have any compatibility issues. We are not putting that piece of OT equipment at risk because another agent is running that might crash the system. That doesn't exist. So it's very easy and very lightweight to use our technology to protect these environments or to protect these this OT equipment. Now, the second thing is what do you do with air-gapped environments, right? You have those OT systems that you want to protect with multi-factor authentication, but the solution right now is to expose them to the internet to have the second factor kick in, which sits on your phone or on an application on the desktop. Now, we don't need that. We can completely work in air-gapped environments using hardware tokens. So you actually can protect environments or OT equipment that is not exposed to the internet with additional multi-factor authentication by using hardware tokens in a very simple way. And coming to the tiering question, if you remember the challenges that we've seen before in the Purdue model, that is something that is actually built into our platform. It's a module called PAS, Privileged Access Security, which allows you to do automated tiering. It will actually see identities being used for certain environments. For example, the OT environment will tag them as such by looking at the authentications to those environments, and it can then protect those tiers. It can then prevent cross-tier authentications from happening. For example, if an identity is used to connect to a critical tier, and we see that identity being used to a lower tier, we can actually block that authentication to the lower tier because it is tagged to be used for that critical tier. Why would you want to do that? Because you don't want to leave a low tier or a high tier hash from a high tier authentication in a low tier so that an attacker could use that to do privilege escalation. So we can prevent that in a very simple way. And the second thing that we can do here is what we call just-in-time access. Now, just-in-time access isn't something that's totally new to the market. It's something that has been around for a while, but what we do is slightly different. What we can actually do is to automatically disable all the privileged accesses or the privileged accounts in your IAM infrastructure, only enabling them when they are actually needed. So for example, you could say when a vendor needs to connect to an OT system in your environment because they need to do some maintenance on that OT equipment or deploy a patch or whatever they need to do, their identity only gets enabled in real time, just takes a matter of seconds when they need to have that access and they need to justify why they need to have that access. And the nice thing about that is it is going to be disabled automatically afterwards. And this obviously drastically reduces the surface of attack, which means that an adversary will not even see that this identity exists because by default it is disabled in your identity infrastructure. All right. So this is really how Silverfort can help. This is the core of our business, what we do specifically for OT equipment. It's a very elegant and lightweight solution to implement that is non-disruptive. But where would you want to start? How do you kick off a, I don't want to say a Silverfort project, but to actually, how do you actually see what your identity security posture looks like? Now, what we have is what we call the Silverfort free assessment. Actually, what we offer you, and we will share the slides afterwards. You can see the link up here. If you register with that link, what you will get access to is a Silverfort deployment that we can put in your environment for 2 weeks without enforcing anything. We are not going to put MFA in. We are not going to ring-fence service accounts. We are just going to monitor that environment. We are going to see every single authentication happening. And don't worry, all of the data will stay in your environment. No data will be sent to Silverfort. This is an on-premise deployment. And by the end of the 2 weeks, that will issue a report. And that report will give you a full visibility of all the authentications that happened over that time, to what environments, from which identities, to which servers. It will show you all the ITDR elements. And I'm not sure if you can read this here. It's pretty small, but that's just one slide of the resulting report, which shows you all the risk indicators that we've seen during those 2 weeks in that environment: service accounts behaving weirdly, users having too much access, old passwords, all those things we can uncover. And with that report, we believe that the value is quite significant. We've made an analysis to look at what would this cost a company of a certain size to get that data that we actually deliver in the report by using a consultant to actually exfiltrate that data from the logs from the identity infrastructure. And the gain is quite significant. As you can see here, I'm not going to go through all of the numbers, but what we deliver here has quite some value. What does it cost you? Well, Silverfort doesn't charge for it. It is going to cost you a discovery call, which is an hour of your time, an initial setup, which is another hour of your time, a quick check-in, and the generation and the review of the report. All of this is done by our sales engineers. So if you register on the website, a sales engineer will contact you and will go through with you what it actually entails, how we would do that, how we would do the setup, how we would do the deployment, which actually only takes an hour, and then we'll let it run for 2 weeks. The sales engineer will check in with you again, will produce the report, and we'll actually go with you through the report to help you with prioritizing your next task when it comes to identity security. All right, so that's pretty much what I wanted to share for today. I left 10 minutes for Q&A. I'm not sure, so John, since you're on, do we have any questions? I don't have the Q&A tab open right now. Anything that needs answers?
No, we haven't seen any questions in the Q&A at this point, but guys, just to reiterate Jerome's point, if you've got any questions, you've got myself, Jaco, and Jerome on the call right now. Put something in the chat, or let's see if we can help you in any way.
Don't be shy. If there's anything that's not clear, we're more than happy to answer this. Maybe John, I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit on. Well, I'm not sure if we know that, but for the clients that we have in the same sectors, how they're using our technology, how long they've been using our technology, and some of the responses that we get from them.
Sure. No problem at all. So the oldest one is obviously one of the biggest Chrome mines in the world. In fact, they are the biggest Chrome mine in the world. They've been using us for about 18 months now. The installation, we ran it from end to end in about 2 weeks, got everything up and running, got the initial discoveries done. It takes more time to deploy the virtual infrastructure than it does to actually get your first look at valuable information. So that's done, complete. They've been using us for about 18 months. They use us for both their corporate environment as well as their OT environment. The request from their side was very much around managing non-human identity within their environment, because it's a challenge for everybody we talk to. The second two, one of them was recently under attack over December. We'd had an initial discussion with them and we'd run a proof of concept. They ended up under attack during the December holiday. We basically restarted the proof of concept and immediately jumped into protection mode and eliminated the problem, isolated the identities that were stolen, and gave them the ability to get back into their environment without the absolute carnage of tear everything down and start from scratch. The other one is obviously a very large gold mine. You all know them, and they have looked at us for exactly the same reasons, trying to protect identities, trying to understand who's connecting to what and how and why. They're now getting quite advanced. They're starting to look at the next abilities around privilege. So yeah, it's quite exciting with them. We're growing nicely. Lots of positives. The other piece of this I just want to mention, because it seems we often overlook it as a Silverfort team, is we will help you get to the point where you are achieving value. So we have a customer success management team that will engage and help you get up, running, get the first policies built, get the first MFAs in place, get the first service accounts protected, and give you that ability to quick start your environment. You know, we don't want to give you something and 6 months later we're still trying to get it into the environment. So the idea here is just put it in, get it built, get you some value, and get you some quick value. So guys, any other questions, anything you want to ask? Other than that, we really appreciate you making the time for us. We love showing this technology. There's value for you guys straight out of the box. So Jerome, thanks for an awesome session. Appreciate it. And Jaco, over to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, John. Thanks, Jerome. Really really insightful presentation. Thank you very much. Like I said, the presentation and the recording will be shared. I think just one of the things that we have realized is that, and it was part of the presentation as well, is your supply chain tend to be the part that is being exploited, or that is what we have seen with most of our mining clients that have suffered loss. In one instance, it was the security as service provider that was used to compromise. In another incident, the vendor did not install a patch. So and the other one that I'm aware of is where they used social engineering to get into the system initially. So so those are the three claims on the mining side that I'm aware of, or that was clients of Marsh. It is we've had a number of claims in the mining industry in the last 12 months, and it doesn't look like it's letting up. But yeah, I think one thing that the stats are showing us is that supply chain, or the people that you are reliant on in providing you with services or securities on your IT environment, looks to be more of a target, because that's probably the easier way in, because your front end is properly protected with the right tools and applications. So but thank you very much for everybody joining, and if there are no further questions, then I think we can close the call.
Very well. Thank you, Jaco. Thank you, everybody on the call. Have a good rest of your day and hopefully talk to you in the next webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank
Jerome.
you.
Go well. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.